Do you anticipate having a larger budget at the EPA next year or a smaller budget?
For 2015?
Yeah.
The President's budget that was submitted to Congress was smaller than 2014.
Okay. What's the additional cost of implementing this new rule?
Well, it's a combination between the EPA and the Corps of Engineers.
We've met before in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. So I asked the question then. I'll ask you again. Hopefully we get the same number. What's the cost of implementing this rule?
If you let me shuffle a paper, I will give you the same answer.
I'll give it to you. I don't want to put you on the spot. It was 100 to 200 million. Does that sound about right?
That sounds in the ballpark.
I have a transcript. Okay.
I can get it.
Isn't it a little bit fiscally irresponsible to undertake a $100 to $200 million project when you anticipate your budget will decrease?
When we do those cost estimates, we are doing those cost estimates on what the cost to the economy is. And so that means like 160 to 280.
Okay.
And those are permit processing expenses and mitigation expenses that might have to come into play if somebody wants to get a permit and they have to mitigate. They can do the activity, but they have to do mitigation.
You plan on passing those costs on to the people that are going to file for permits?
Well, those are the costs we estimated of doing the permits and also doing the mitigation.
I think it's fiscally irresponsible to undertake this new rule that will undeniably cost you more money to implement when you know, in fact, the President acknowledges that your budget is going to go down. Let me ask you another question. Can you have science without measurements, without numbers, without units?
For most science, you need that. I'm going to say that there's probably some that you don't. But.
Well, I'm looking at the rule here. I can't find any numbers. I can't find any unit measurements. Let me give you an example. Definition of a floodplain. Term floodplain means an area bordering inland or coastal waters that was formed by sediment deposition from such water under present climatic conditions and is inundated during periods of moderate to high water flows. Is moderate to high a scientific term?
I think these are terms that are used routinely in the science of hydrology.
Okay. Can you convert that to gallons per minute? Moderate to high?
Depends on the size of the stream and the drainage area.
Okay.
Or in the case of the Atlantic Ocean, it's pretty big.
You know what? Without facts, all you have is an opinion. And this leaves it open to opinion. So without units, you cannot have science. Without measurements. Let me ask you another question from the definition here. These are features that are exempt under this rule. One of them is an artificial lake or pond created by excavating and or diking dry land. I own a farm. I built a few ponds. The last place I would put a pond is where there is dry land, where there is no water. How can you dike dry land and create a pond for irrigation?
Well, you take an area of a stream an area of a field or a woodland where the slope is in this direction, and you put up
so there's some flow of water.
Dike, and when it rains, the water comes down and it settles behind.
So you get some water that's coming not just landing in the pond, but from surrounding areas. Yeah. So there's a flow across that land.
Yes.
So if the goal here is to create an exemption for landowners that they can understand, why wouldn't you put a scientific unit of measure in there? Like, what's a unit of measure for a pond or a lake?
Gallons.
It's gallons, but that's a little hard to. That's a good number. Acre feet is another.
Acre feet is a bigger one.
Used, yeah. So why wouldn't you put a definition in there that's scientific? Because clearly there's flow of water going into this. So there has to be some flow. You could define it in gallons per minute or something like that, the pond in acre feet, because it's clearly not going to be on dry land if you're creating this, or it wouldn't exist. You'd have a dry pond, and I have built a few of those too.
Well, the concept of dry land is the land is not it's not currently a lake or a stream or a river.
I think it'd have to be under a roof, really, to be completely dry. There has to be some flow. What I'm asking here is for some definition.
It's a term of art in hydrology.
Yeah, a term of art. I'd like a term of science. You know, like when you define a bank, how tall is the bank in feet?
There are criteria for a bank, and there's criteria for a high water mark.
So on the, let's just quickly, my time is almost expired. On a floodplain, what are the units to define the size and scope of a floodplain?
Normally, floodplains are defined by the frequency.
That's how we define them.
The frequency of inundation.
Correct. So why wouldn't you define a floodplain that way instead of leaving it so open-ended to say that it's moderate to high water flows?
Well,
That's not would you agree that's not a scientific term, moderate to high? There's no units, there's no number.
We've asked for help in defining the size of the floodplain, but it's a specific question we've asked in the proposal.
Well, that's a science. It's already established. I suggest you go use some science. Thank you.
So it's 100, 500, we've asked for advice on what size and how to do that.
Well, it's very clear science. You could use some science in these definitions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Massie.